County Schools, Chuck Ecker. I want to welcome him. Current board member Brian Meshkin. And current Howard County board member Flynn Giles as well. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening, but we're going to talk a little bit about education, and I'm going to turn it over to our hostess of honor, yes, Janine Diaz.
I just want to ask initially, and then as we go into the discussion, everybody has a chance to ask questions. I know I've never seen the movie before, and this movie certainly made me have other questions, and I'm sure for some of you it did as well. Let me just ask the first couple of questions, and we can get it go. Do you see an impact on educational achievement where outside government entities are requiring graduates to attain proficiencies, have extracurricular subjects, for example, knowledge of environmental education, sexual lifestyle training, etc. Within this question, in your view, how effective is the top-down approach, meaning all the government mandates on education?
Well, I don't think they're very effective. There. Okay, now, top down there a little earlier, I was hearing somebody said get rid of the Federal Department of Education, and there's some I clapped too. Yeah, Reagan said it, yeah, and I tell you, they pass some ridiculous things and pass it on down and expect the local school systems to carry it through. And this race to the top we're involved with now, it has a good goal, but I think we need to have more local control and less government and interference.
I concur with Dr. Ecker. I think that one of the things that you find is a very peculiar conundrum. It's one of the things I'm going to be speaking with Ellen about and my colleagues on the board is there was an approval of the Race at the Top program by our local Board of Education. And it seems to be conventional wisdom, even the superintendent would say, that we have 95% of our headaches that come from these regulations from the federal government, yet less than 1% of our funding does. And so that leads me to believe when you look at the very little bit of funding we get for all of these mandates, that in all likelihood we're probably using the taxpayer dollars of Howard County citizens to subsidize the implementation of these federal government mandates. And so it seems to me that we should just turn down the money and not take the money.
Right.
And just say, take it, we don't need it, considering it's such a small percentage of things. And so I think there's some things we have to work through there, but I think we need to start demanding of our elected officials to say, okay, we may wait for the president, like President Reagan, and I grew up, in Reagan's America, to say let's abolish the Department of Education, but let's just not take the money. I think that's a great approach to take, to say we're not interested. And so I think those are some of the things we need to start looking at.
Okay, well, I believe sincerely that many of the mandates that have been pushed down by the feds and the state have certainly made things more difficult and not necessarily looked at what's absolutely the best for the students in your particular area and where you're particularly going. The federal money, though it doesn't come directly to us, I'd say one of the issues is that the federal money comes to the state, and under the Constitution, education is the state responsibility. So the determination of what the requirements are for public education, for free and appropriate education in the United States rests with the individual states. And I do believe one of the good things about Race to the Top or the Common Core is a renewed commitment to the achievement of individual students as opposed to cohorts of students, and to look at the fact that you shouldn't get a worse education if you live in Mississippi, which traditionally has the worst performance in the country, than if you live somewhere else in the country. If what we say is we want and we need our children to be educated and productive citizens in order to compete in a challenging environment, then we need to commit to making sure that each and every child really does have a chance to get where they need to go.
Okay, let me ask a related. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this one, and then I'll open it up. A related question with regard to government mandates and requirements. Have any of the California requirements affected the Howard County educational system, since many of these syllabus changes in textbooks, books, et cetera, have a national impact and influence?
Well, I guess actually the Texas textbooks have a bigger impact. Well, I mean, the largest textbook buyers in the country are California and Texas. And so that sort of determines the direction in which textbook manufacturers go when they're writing them. However, in Maryland, the curriculum is the responsibility of the state, and that doesn't necessarily adhere to Texas or California. And individual school systems decide the books they want to buy because they complement and supplement the curriculum that's locally written, as opposed to being the book that's used for the course. So I don't think really that's necessarily happened. I think it's something that it's a reason why we have textbook committees and citizens on committees in order to look at what is being approved. And I think it's something that you always want to make sure that you're not limiting what you expose students to, and that you're vetting what it is you're putting in the classroom, and that you understand how that supports what's been locally approved.
I've been in the school system for 8 years, and I'll tell you, in spite of all this talk, the biggest problem in every class and every school I've been in is discipline. You can't teach in a classroom with kids that have no discipline, and no one backs you up. It's terrible. And I've read that teachers only last 5 years. That's amazing.
So that's an observation. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
I'd like to know what could be done about that.
Can we also get Brian and Chuck to answer the previous question after this one? Sure. Thank you.
Okay. To address the question that was just raised, I think oftentimes we look at certain socio-demographic statistics, trying to group people together as an excuse for certain behavior and certain failings in school systems. I think that oftentimes people will say, well, poverty can be a huge factor in things, and that poverty then breeds social problems that may relate to behavior and those type of things. But I believe that social problems are what breed the poverty, and not vice versa. I think that a lot of the breakdown that you see in the family, I think a lot of the impact that has in those child's home provides them with a skill set and a perspective that they then bring into that classroom. And that becomes a huge challenge, not only for the educator, but for the administrator to deal with. Many of the challenges that I think we saw in that film are not necessarily challenges that fall at the feet of the teacher, but also fall at the feet of what is the public school system, and includes the public itself. These schools in many ways are microcosms of the real world. And so as we've seen morals decline, as we've seen families break up, I just read a study recently from the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia, where they talked about that there are more children that are now raised in homes of cohabitation versus homes that are divorced homes, because there's far less marriage, so therefore there's far less divorce. All of that plays a huge role in those child's behavior and the child's perspective when they come in that classroom. Unfortunately, those are challenges that per se the board cannot address with policy, nor would you probably want the government to be getting involved in those issues. But they are real challenges, and so we need to come up with ways to compensate for that and deal with that. And there needs to be that strong discipline. I think a lot of it, my good friend I graduated from Glen High School as a band teacher at Lisbon Elementary School. He's one of the few males in the building. And so when there's a discipline issue, the principal who happens to be female will pull him in to deal with some of those issues as a male in the building. And it puts him in an interesting kind of awkward situation, but he deals with it and he does a good job with it. There are a lot of things that I think we need to look at when we're dealing with these microcosms of the real world. And I think it involves getting the community involved, getting the communities of faith involved, getting businesses involved, and looking at this more as a public school rather than just a government school. Because we can solve a lot of these problems that are societal in nature and not necessarily a government problem.
Ron did it right there. We need the whole community together. We need the parents, we need businesses, all cooperating, working with the school system working with them. We need the school system to work with the local government. A lot of times we say they're on one side of the fence and the school system, government's on one side and the school system on the other. We kind of work together. And I have 6 expectations, and it gets back to your discipline. One of them is we have to expect kids to be in school. We have to expect kids to behave. We have to expect teachers to teach. We have to expect parents to be involved. And we have to expect every student to learn, that they can learn. No exceptions, no excuses. And the sixth expectation is we have to expect everybody to treat others the way they want to be treated, with dignity, respect, understand, and kindness. And that would take care of a lot of the bullying, I think, and the other discipline problems we have. One problem we have with discipline, sometimes we'll discipline a kid in school, and the parents come in and give us a hard time. And I think too many parents neglect their children, and then they try to buy their love by never saying no and giving them money. And that's